Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
Welcome to the Late Show with John B, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome someone who I have known for a fair few years now, actually, and someone who I have, until very recently, not been able to call a colleague, but now is very, very welcome in a trust that we are both working at. And it's Sam Keys. Tonight we're going to be talking all things SEND, relationships, and everything in between. So, welcome, Sam. How are you?
I'm good, yes. I'm going to apologise from the off. I'm in my car at the moment. My little girl is a bit poorly and I didn't dare try and get through this without waking her up. So if you hear the rain, it's just Newcastle letting you know that it's still raining up here.
Excellent. And what's going to be nice tonight is that I'm not going to feel too isolated, as our accents are fairly similar. And, you know, when I do these shows, Sam, sometimes I'm talking with people across the UK, across the world. So it's really nice to have somebody so local to join with the accent. Sam, just to kind of kick us off then, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us your Twitter handle?
Yeah, I'm Sam Keys. I'm at Mr_K3YS. I am now a head of school in the trust that you're working in, John, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
My sort of journey is I started off as an NQT just outside Newcastle. Quickly found myself in the position to be a Senko. So with Senko, I think NQT +1. Stayed there for about 7 years in Wallsend, just near Newcastle. Moved across to the west end of Newcastle for a deputy head position. So deputy head, year 6 and Senko again. And then just at October half term, I've moved to cover a maternity leave as a head of school in a little school near Durham. So yeah, quite a varied mix. Lots of different local authorities, lots of different trusts. But Sen sort of been at the heart of it all the way through.
Very good. And obviously, Sam brings with him a wealth of experience with everything SEND. And for those listening either live or listening on Catch Up on Spotify or other channels, you can contact Sam on his Twitter handle. I know he's very responsive and would be happy to answer any follow-up questions either during the show or, as I say, a bit further down the line. So just before we start then, Sam, thank you for the introduction. The next part of kind of what I'm going to ask is called Desert Island Desks, completely stolen from Desert Island Discs from the BBC. Although this time we're not choosing songs, this time we are choosing 3 things that you couldn't teach without.
Do you know what? I've listened to a few of the shows on Spotify, and
Mm.
I always think, what a really good idea to have said that. And then when I was sat down this afternoon thinking, what am I going to say that's not been said again and again and again? I thought, I don't know. So I've thought of a few things, and they come in pairs. So I know you said 3, but it's probably going to be like 6. So we'll see how this goes. So the first thing that I really, really, really need when I'm teaching is I like to have an iPad, and I like to have a screen that I can share to. So
Mhm.
I like, if I'm working with a child, for example, at the back of the class, and then somebody else puts their hands up, and I know that I'm going to have to talk to 3 or 4 of them, I like to be able to quickly doodle on my iPad screen and show that to the whole class, as opposed to stopping what I'm doing, walking across, losing my pen on the way, putting something down. So iPad and screen shares sort of the first pairing. The second
Excellent.
pairing is when I got my first job in a school, I wanted to think of some sort of behaviour system, and the mentor that I'd worked with had this jar, and every time the kids did something well, he put a marble in the jar, and we've all heard it before. When you fill the jar, the class get a treat and what have you. And I was
Mm.
looking for something to have the equivalent, and my mum bought me this huge Coca-Cola bottle. It was like you might have seen them. They're like money box type things, but it's about, I don't know, 2.5, 3 foot tall, enormous thing, and then a bag full of ball pool balls. And so that quickly became my marble in my jar, and it went with me in every single classroom. And up until just before October half term, when I retired it, it was the same bottle that seen me through 12 years, I think. So the balls and the bottle, they were definitely the second combination. And then the third one, this one isn't a pair, this one's on its own. I absolutely cannot speak highly enough for teaching assistants. So I think
Mm.
I think that would be my third one, a teaching assistant. I know it's not an object, but they need to come with me. They are the unsung heroes of schools, and I know you talk about that a lot as well, John. But
Mm.
yeah, teaching assistant would round that off for me.
That's a really nice one, and I'm sure teaching assistants who are listening will really appreciate it. And all of the schools that I've worked in and continue to go into, the teaching assistant schools simply could not operate in the same way as without teaching assistants. So a really worthwhile mention there, Sam. Just before we dive into SEND and relationships, we're kind of I'm going to bring you just a message from our sponsor. So this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. You can visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range and titles to advance your own professional development today. So happy reading, folks, and do check out all of the fabulous resources from John Catt. So welcome to Sam on this episode of The Late Show with John B, and we're going to dive straight in. And we're going to start, Sam, by talking around SEND. And for those teachers who are listening in who have an interest in kind of SEND or SENCOs or aspiring SENCOs, or actually just any teacher listening, what advice would you give on how to create an inclusive classroom for all learners?
Yeah, it's a really big question. I guess I'm going to touch on it a little bit later on as well. But the most important thing for me is relationships. If you don't get that environment right, it doesn't matter what you're going to put in front of those children. It's not going to help. For me, the most important thing is going back to that Maslow, making sure the kids feel safe and secure and happy in that environment, and then you can build on that. So before you look at any textbooks, before you buy any resources, before you think about what you're going to differentiate and how you're going to do it and all that sort of stuff, get that atmosphere right. So for me, that is, yes, it's the physical environment, the low stimulus classroom, the resources available, but more importantly, it's the smile at the door. It's the understanding who needs the 5-minute check-ins every now and then. It's understanding who doesn't want you to crowd over them. They just need to know you're there. It's the nods, the smiles. Find out what makes them tick. That's the most important thing for me, making sure they feel safe and secure. one example I've got is there was a boy I taught a few years ago who had really struggled through school, really struggled with relationships, and when trust sort of broke down between him and the members of staff, you couldn't really get it back. So I knew from the off I was going to have to really work hard to try and get him on side. So it was just little things, doing things that I knew that were going to, build that trust. So if I promised something, make sure that happens. So saying, oh, you've said there that you're really interested in Batman, for example. I've got this cool Batman pen. Tomorrow I'm going to bring it in for you. And then tomorrow I would say, look, I've got that Batman pen that we're talking about. And so he thought, this guy's not just in it for the token gestures. He's going to follow this on day after day. So yeah, relationships are paramount above absolutely everything for me. And then the other stuff comes in too.
Yeah, and it's often time well spent to really invest in children's interests. I really like what you said there around kind of even just small things like a smile at the door, and having that as not a whole school policy, but a kind of just a way of really developing a culture and a feel in a school. Standing at the classroom door each morning, welcoming children in, making sure that you say good morning. I used to work for a head teacher fairly recently who had said by the time the children have reached the first gate of the school and by the time they've walked through the yard and into the classroom, they quite often said good morning to about 3 members of staff. And it really sets the tone for the day in a quite a cheery, positive way. And again, just a good way of building those relationships with perhaps children that you teach day to day, or children that you don't teach day to day. You can still kind of begin to create those relationships and develop that culture. So yeah, really interesting on the relationship side. Just thinking then around some of the SEND and kind of the needs that you find in classrooms, Sam. Are there any kind of general strategies beyond what we've just talked about that might be useful for teachers?
I guess it sort of depends on the need, really. One of the big things I've seen, especially sort of since COVID, is the absolute rocket in, SEMH concerns in classrooms. So we've got more and more children with anxiety, more and more children who have got they're on the the neurodevelopmental pathway for possible ADHD or possible autism. I'm seeing that really, really increase lately. In between different authorities, it seems to be the picture generally across the country. So one of the things that we're really hammering home on in the school that I worked in previously and the one I'm in now is getting that sort of system right. These children often are going to be sat on a waiting list for 3 to 4 years, and that it's not good enough to go, right, okay, we've done our referral and now we sit and wait. We've got to strike straight away and get something in place. So things that we've set up, you mentioned there about the greeting at the door, we made that a whole school policy. Some of those children, especially the older children, they haven't seen another adult. They haven't seen, interacted with anybody in that morning. Some of them are getting themselves up and getting themselves breakfast and getting themselves to school. And so you're the first person to see. So telling them that they haven't got their uniform on, or telling them that they've got the wrong type of shoes on, or criticising something they did the day before is just going to set them off on the wrong tone, isn't it? So I totally agree. We made that a school policy that we greet them at the door with a smile and a compliment where we can. Then things like zones of regulation. So we've got, I used something called Zoomos before. There's something called the Hue app. It's like a check-in, emotional check-in, non-intrusive. The kids just simply tap to say how they're feeling, and the teacher's got that access to that data. Say, oh, look, such and such is feeling really quite low today. So then you can go in and check in the way that you know how. So getting those basics in. I'm a massive advocate of the Thrive approach. We had Thrive in my last school, and one of those things was how you attune to how the kids are feeling. So I'm going to shout out to Jack Howell, who worked with me in my last school, who was absolutely brilliant. And she said, when a child comes at you with a feeling, you need to catch it, match it and offer it back named. So if they came to you and they're saying, oh, look, I'm really sad because my cat died yesterday, instead of saying like, oh, don't worry, it'll be all right, visibly like react to that. So catch that emotion and almost take it off them and go, oh, right, it's really tough when something like that happens. You know, you must be feeling really upset right now and possibly a bit confused. And so you're giving them complete attunement. You're saying you agree with how they're feeling. It's perfectly normal to feel that way, but it does feel bad. You're not dismissing it, and you're naming it as well. You're saying that's, that is deep upset, that's worry, that's concern, or whatever it may look like. So yeah, those sort of things, to turn them into a culture in a school instead of it just being a gimmick at the door, really, really help those children that, like I say, are sitting there for 3-4 years before a professional tells them, right, okay, now we're going to start this process of trying to figure out what's going on and how it can help. So that's just one example of social emotional stuff. When you're looking at things like children, I've also noticed a real increase in children with dyslexia. Again, there's loads of things that you can just be doing. Having word mats out on tables, having working walls that are, visible all around the classroom, having a handwriting policy that, a cursive one or a pre-cursive one that matches sort of the fonts in dyslexia-friendly text. Just getting those basics right. Newcastle Council that I worked in previously had something called the SEN Mainstream Guidance, and it was packed full of just things that you do all the time, or things that you think, that makes total sense. Why haven't I done that before? And so I often go back to that and say, look, this is what we just need to set up. That quality first teaching actually needs to be really high quality first teaching, because we are that we're the go-between now. We've got a lot to do for these children before they ever meet a professional to help support them.
Absolutely, yeah. You know what you've said around waiting lists is a national issue, not just a localized one. Just to circle back a little bit there, Sam, on you mentioned the Thrive approach. For those that are not familiar with it, can you just kind of talk around what it is and what it aims to achieve?
Absolutely. I'm going to probably do this no justice at all, so please research it after this and feel free to tell me if I'm wrong. But basically, the Thrive approach works on the principle that we go through, all of us go through different stages of development. I'm not going to try and name them because I'll get them in the wrong order, and if Jack ever listens, she'll tell me off. And so basically, before you can fully progress to the next stage of development, you have to secure everything within that stage you're in. So I think the first one's being, then thinking, and then doing, and then it goes on to power and all that sort of stuff. So children that perhaps haven't had a really nurturing environment at a very young age might have gaps in their being stage of development. And so one example to try and illustrate that would be that when you go through this Thrive assessment approach, you might find out that somebody who perhaps didn't have that sort of nurturing environment as a baby and wasn't cradled or rocked when they were crying as a child, they might be stuck and have gaps at that being stage. So then the Thrive approach offers suggestions of how you can support that child by giving them some of those skills that will then later sort of help them out. So I'm doing a rubbish job of this. But if a child, like I say, wasn't sort of rocked back and forth to sleep when they were crying, they might not later on know how to sort of self-regulate. So some of the activities they might suggest are you might play like a rock and boat game with this child and talk about how that's making you feel calm, and you're trying to give them words and giving them explanation and experience that sort of helps them sort of fill in some of those gaps that they may have. Like I say, it's a really comprehensive tool, and there's a reason why you have to be sort of specifically trained for it, because it involves a lot of quite high level psychology to fully understand it. So definitely research it. It is quite expensive, but lots of local authorities are definitely keen to support. I know when I worked in North Tyneside, they were keen to support it there. Newcastle was the same. It's brilliant. We were moving when I was at my last school to a stage where it wasn't just Jack who was the Thrive practitioner. who was doing these interventions, it was becoming a whole class thing where were incorporating it into PSHE lessons and things like that. So yeah, definitely have a look at the Thrive approach.
Great, thanks for that, Sam. And what strikes me about you've mentioned there about Thrive, Catch It, Match It, and Throw It Back to them, both of which sound like really good strategies. Essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, what it sounds like is we're offering kind of emotional literacy to the children so that they can kind of articulate their feelings and their thoughts when, sometimes it can be really difficult to find the words as an adult, never mind as a child.
100%. That's exactly it. We're giving them, as you say, that language to be able to communicate it. When I went to school, certainly that was not the environment that I was brought up in. And I look back now and I speak quite openly about the fact that when I was a child, I really, really suffered with anxiety. Massively so. Various things going on in home life and things like that. I was a child on the SEN register. I was a child who really struggled, and it was very much, grow up, or boys don't cry, all of that sort of stuff, that culture that we talk about now and go, how did that happen and why was that the case? And
Yeah.
I didn't have the words to say that I was worried, about my mum and my dad. I didn't have the words to say that I felt vulnerable because I felt like I was looking after my brothers, that sort of stuff. So now we're being able to say to these children, I know what you're feeling. It doesn't mean I'm throwing it away, I'm getting rid of it. I know that you're feeling, anxious. I know that you're feeling dysregulated. And when a child can communicate that, it gives them power, doesn't it? And they've got that power to say, well, actually, because I know that and I know what it is, and I know that I'm not alone in that, I know that I can come back from that. I really, really can't, speak highly enough for the as I say, going back to teaching assistants, because they're often the ones that are doing this. They're the ones that are sort of sitting with these children and explaining their worries and helping them overcome them. But yeah, emotional literacy, and that's one thing that we've just enrolled some of our teaching assistants on some ELSA training, so emotional literacy support assistant training. So they're doing a lot of that, communicating feelings and all of that sort of stuff.
Super. It sounds like great work and something I think that teaching assistants would be, most teaching assistants that I've came across in my career kind of seem naturally attuned to that kind of work. So to have some additional support, training, professional development to really enhance that, I think would be time really well spent. Thanks, Sam. That's really helped us understand kind of the approach. For teachers listening then, Senkos or leaders, what are your thoughts around differentiation, in particular for children with SEND?
Now there's a big question. And I think if I had the answer to that, I'd probably be very rich. I think I'm going to liken this to one of my roles in my last school. Was I was educational visits coordinator, and stick with me on this one. And one of the things that they often encourage was, yes, you can do a risk assessment about a visit, and you can say what the pitfalls are going to be, and you can say where the risks are and how such and such might need to take this because they'll struggle on the the surface or the steps or whatever. They always said you need to do dynamic risk assessment, so dynamic and ongoing risk assessment. And I thought I'm a bit of an advocate for dynamic differentiation as well. You could plan this, bells and whistle lessons and say that such and such is going to need this and such needs this. And they always shock you, don't you? And they normally shock you when you've got somebody in watching you to tell you if you're doing a good job or not. So for me, dynamic differentiation is sort of the way. Be prepared to offer resources and scaffolding, but I'm always going to go back to, I want to give everybody the chance to go as far as they possibly can. You often find it, don't you? It was always the lessons for me around shape and space or statistics, where I've prepared this lesson. I've said such and such who's really struggled with number and really struggled with I don't know, their arithmetic and the calculation, then pulls out all the stops, and that actually, they know all of the names and the words associated with 3D shapes. They know how to draw a pie chart. They're absolutely brilliant at algebra because you've introduced it using shapes or whatever that may be. I just think always be prepared for them to shock you, because I think that's really important too. So in terms of differentiation, I sort of said it before, having things available, having options, having working walls, having scaffolds, having resources and manipulatives out for everybody. Good practice for Sen is actually just good practice for everyone, isn't it? If you get that right, and you get that environment right, and you get those non-negotiables right, you're going to give everybody a chance. So I've kind of not answered that question in the slightest by saying that actually it's much bigger than just, we're not just saying such and such is going to do this task while such and such does this task. There's so many other routes to it. So dynamic differentiation, maybe I should trademark that one.
Yeah, I like that. A really nice way of putting it and very succinct. What I liked about that, and with my kind of maths hat on, I'm going to kind of extend that point a little bit there, Sam. Sam chose an example there which focused on geometry and, children with SEND, children without SEND may be low attaining in arithmetic, number, fractions. That has limited kind of links to their ability with geometry or other areas of maths. It's, the maths is quite often considered quite compartmentalized with the different units and the different kind of contents that you're teaching in a way that perhaps reading and writing isn't, or other subjects. So it's an interesting angle to look at it from SEND, particularly from a maths point of view as well, where actually you can quite often find children are particularly strong in one area, such as shape and geometry, but perhaps less secure in other areas of maths. And that kind of makes sense really when you think around it like that. Okay, right. We are thinking about SEND. We're going to kind of change the lens a little bit, and we kind of started the show talking around this, and it was Sam's first point about creating an inclusive classroom and building that relationship and trust. So the next part really, Sam, is about effective relationships, and the line of questioning is going to be all around that. So kind of the first question is, if we're saying relationships are important for an inclusive classroom, why are the relationships between teacher and students that important?
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term? We've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today, and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
Yeah, good question. And I guess I will repeat myself a little bit, so I apologise for that. But for me, it's the most important thing. Trust, respect. I had 4 rules when I was in the classroom. It was be kind, work hard, listen carefully, and be respectful. And that goes both ways. And so if a child knows exactly where things are, they know exactly what the routines are, they know that these are the non-negotiables. Whatever happens, Mr. Keys is going to do this, this, and this. If this happens, this happens. If this happens, this happens. Everyone just feels safe and secure. They know what's going on. If something changes, you communicate it well, but because you're that person that they trust and respect, they're going to understand that change. So I was all about that first week, perhaps even beforehand, if you knew that there was a child coming into your class the following year who's going to need that little bit more work, just building up that trust, making sure that they feel safe and happy in your presence, and then you're on to a good thing. I genuinely think that it's the core part of teaching, is that they look at the front of that classroom or wherever you are, and they go, yeah, he understands me. He's listening to me. When I say something, he's not just throwing it away. He cares about me. And because of that, I'm going to give him that respect back. And don't get us wrong, I'm saying this like every classroom I'm in, I've got 30 children looking at me like Miss Honey and I'm teaching Matildas. That's not the case. And it does go wrong. It absolutely does go wrong. And you get children who don't, no matter what effort you put in, they don't show that trust. There might be barriers, there might be history that they've got, there might be difficult circumstances at home, which means that the person stood at the front of the class is not going to just gain their trust instantly. It's hard work. It really is hard work. I said this when I spoke to Matt on Primary Education Voices. I was a bang average teacher, but I genuinely think I was really good at the relationship side of things, which made me a better teacher. So going back to your question, why do I think it's so important? I think it's more important than pedagogy. And, people might disagree with that, but for me, that is the most important thing. I look back at my education and I think the teachers that I feel like I learned the most from, when I think about a lesson that they taught, I struggle. But when I think about the conversations they had with me, I can remember them like they were yesterday. I can think about a teacher in my primary school who clearly just got me. He just understood me. And because of that, I listened to every word he said. Going again into high school, there was a teacher called Mr. Clifford, and he understood that what was going on in my life was probably a little bit different to many others. And because of that, he showed that in the way he interacted with me. I would have done any assignment he asked. The coursework that I did for him was 10 times longer than the coursework I did for anyone else. When he was doing revision classes on in the Easter holidays, I was there, all based on relationship. Sir John Jones did a course that I went on years and years ago, and he talked about teachers being magic weavers, and he said the same thing. The ones that weave the magic are the ones that you've got those relationships with, the ones that spot you in your moment of need, the ones that speak to you in the way that you need to be spoken to. And I love telling this story, and I've probably told you this one before, John. I think one of the events that we've crossed paths on, John Jones said you've got to reach out and tell your magic weaver thank you. And I did. I wrote an email to Mr. Clifford, and I was absolutely dead excited to try and reach out to him. And I didn't hear anything back for a while. And then there was a day when I was working in North Tyneside, and there was a boy who had quite significant needs, and he was having a bad day. And I'd spent a bit of time with him trying to, regulate and things like that. And it had been really tricky. And I got to lunchtime and I was exhausted. And I went to my cupboard and I checked my phone, and there was one email sat there, and it was from Mr. Clifford. And it took me back to being that child in school. And I thought, wow, for somebody to have that hold and have that impression for, years and years and years, that is magic. And that's all because of a relationship. I think it's so important.
I think it was Maya Angelou who crystallized exactly what you're saying there, Sam. And I'm sure she said something along the lines of, you will forget what people say, but you will never forget how they made you feel. which I think sounds like it rings true in your case, and certainly rings true in my case. And I'm suspecting most of the listeners as well would agree with that. You tend to work hardest for those that inspire you, those that respect you, those that take a real vested interest in what you do. So I think, yeah, you've really sold why relationships are are really important. And I guess once those relationships are in place, that's where the power of pedagogy comes in. And actually, the relationship that you have with young children might inform the pedagogy that you choose to have in your classroom. So it all links in the grand scheme of things. Um, just thinking then, you did touch on that, Sam, about children who might present difficult behaviour, maybe dysregulated. What advice would you give teachers, Senkos, leaders around kind of supporting children with quite extreme dysregulated behaviour?
Yeah, good question. The first thing I guess I would say is hats off to any secondary teachers who are listening, because I know that it's a completely different ball game. And when we've got them in primary school, it is a very different experience from some of the things I hear about secondary. So when I talk about this, I'm kind of coming at it from a primary angle. When there's been difficult behaviour in the primary schools I've worked in, we often know an awful lot about that child. We often know what their normal triggers are. We often know, whether something's happened that week on their street, or whether something's happened with their sister, or their uncle's in hospital, or their dog's died. We know a lot more. And that's the nature of the beast with secondary schools, is because there's so many more children and they're going to be on, between so many more classrooms and so many more members of staff, that is much harder for secondaries to do. So yeah, when I've experienced difficulties, yes, you try and look for an explanation. Sometimes there's a fairly obvious one. Sometimes you can't ever figure out what the trigger is. Another thing I would say is, don't think you can be all things to all people. When I first became Senko, I thought it gives me license to be the person that fixes everything.
Mm.
And you'll know yourself that that just doesn't happen. Sometimes it can be, you can spend an hour trying to help a child regulate and calm down, and then it just takes one person to come in and say one sentence that you've said 4 billion times, but just that change of face was the person that allowed them to come out of it. I'd also say one of the things that the Thrive approach sort of advocates is, if somebody's in that dysregulated moment, they might not be ready to hear what you've got to say.
Mhm.
Sometimes giving a child space, giving them a safe space to calm down, a safe space to sort of find their way out of it, a safe space to just be in that moment, that's really important too. Often when we're looking at behaviour situations, you want a quick end to it all, don't you? And then you want to wrap it up, and you want to write up what you need to write up, and you want to get the apologies out of the way and all that sort of stuff. But sometimes it's much, much bigger than that. So yeah, those sort of three things. Secondary behaviour, I couldn't possibly comment. I know it's a whole different ball game, and there's some brilliant people working in secondary schools working with behaviour. Secondary, don't think that you can do it because you've got a certain title on your name or whatever it is, or because you're the class teacher, because you know them best. Sometimes it just takes somebody else to come and be that other face. I'm often that other face because I'm not in the classroom anymore. But I certainly, I did used to find that really hard to accept sometimes, that somebody else would come and be that fixer. And the third thing as well is, it's not just going to happen quickly. You need that, sometimes they need that time and space. What I would say is, when it comes to difficult behaviour, going back to what I said at the start about greeting children with a smile and things like that, if at all possible, try and have it closed by the end of that day. The next day is a new day. That child doesn't need grudges going on into day 2 and day 3. they need that reset button pressed. So where possible, I like to make sure that, I know I said there that sometimes you need to give them time and space. I like to make sure that behaviour incidents are dealt with and there's sort of a, an end to it before the end of the day so that the next day is a fresh start. One
Yeah.
of the things I really have enjoyed using is sort of a restorative approach to behaviour. I find that when you've got a school policy where kids are talking about emotions and about feelings, trying to involve them in that discussion a little bit more when they've got that language is really good. So one silly example is, say, two children have fallen out and one child's lashed out at another child. Ask them how they think the other child might feel and what they feel they should have as a punishment for that. 9 times out of 10, those kids are going to be harsher than you were. But it's a good way of bringing that narrative around to, now that's happened, we're going to move on to what happens next.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting points there. One of the things that has struck me, Sam, is, and this comes from a place of kind of fairly recent experience, is if there's a small but significant minority of children who are perhaps behaving in ways that could be physically intimidating, almost dangerous, to the point of being physical with members of staff. Kind of that, I suppose what I'm trying to get at is sometimes building relationships is really tricky, and you have touched upon that for some of the harder to reach children. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on kind of, and I think I could probably guess, but what your thoughts are on when is it right to suspend and to exclude children?
It's really, really tough. It's
Mm.
really, really tough. You meet some schools who wear zero exclusions with pride, and I get it. That's great for them. And then you get some schools who exclude a lot more. I genuinely feel it's really hard to comment when you don't know everything that's gone on. One of the things that I've done recently in my teaching career is I've worked a lot with the high schools where children have gone up from us in primary who have been having a really tough time, and then the transition to high school hasn't gone well.
Yeah.
And the conversation I always have is, have you done everything you possibly can? Have you spoke to everybody you could possibly speak to? Have you put everything in place that you feel could have supported that child? And if your answer is yes, then you can make that decision with confidence. Again, it's so hard to comment, and it's such a tough question.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been there. I've been there with children who've headbutted me. I've been there with children who've thrown things at me. I've had those conversations, and
And
if there's ever a
I
nagging
think,
doubt with me where I feel I haven't done everything I can, I haven't spoken with parents, I haven't worked with agencies, I haven't followed recommendations. If there's a nagging doubt, then I guess sometimes it could be a downfall of mine. I guess I am softer in the approach that it's my last resort. If that comes across, yeah.
yeah, and I think kind of my thinking around that is, if children, if it is a one child or a small group, but a significant group that are behaving like that, and you're trying to put strategies in place, but those strategies we often know can take a while to really kind of embed and to see any change. What message are we then sending to all of the other children about the highly dysregulated behavior? I don't necessarily expect an answer. I think it's an interesting question, and I don't think necessarily that there's a blanket response, like you say, Sam. I think it's a case by case judgment call on the safety of one children, including the psychological safety of children, but also the bigger group of children who perhaps come in, do the right thing all of the time, day in, day out, and how to best protect those in those situations. So yeah, okay. Tell you what, I'm going to read out a quick message from our sponsor, and then we're going to move on to continue looking at relationships. We're going to focus more on relationships with parents. So this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. You can visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. And happy reading, folks. So, some really interesting points made there, Sam. Like I said, we're going to kind of switch it so that the lens now focuses on relationships, but with parents. So why do you think it's so important that teachers engage with parents, Sam?
It won't come as a shock to you that I'm going to come at it from a SEN point of view again here. When I worked in North Tyneside as a Senko at the start of my career, I quickly realised how important parents were in being the missing jigsaw piece to a puzzle that I was trying to solve, and we often overlook them. We often, invite them to support plan meetings where we've already decided what their targets are going to be, and we might have already reviewed them with the teacher already. We might, go on a training session and then, feed that back to staff, but we don't tell the parents of the children that training is going to really help. So one of the things I set up was sort of a parent forum. I was on the Nathan Live conference, the National Association for Special Education Needs, down in Birmingham, I think it was. And I was sat listening to Natalie Packer speak, and she said something about, it was just a comment part of her presentation. I latched onto it. She said, why don't you invite parents to the CBD that staff have? And I sat with that, and when I was on the train on the way home, I thought, there's something in that. Some of these parents, are having a real challenge at home, and we're accessing training and there's spare seats in that classroom, that parents could definitely hear some of this advice, definitely take it. So I thought, I wonder what that looks like in my setting. So the first thing I did was I invited the parents of children with special educational needs in for like a meeting, and I wanted to sort of share my vision. And I sat there on like a cold November evening. The caretaker had stayed late to let parents in. I bought some biscuits and cakes and sweets and stuff, and one by one, a few parents started to trickle in, and I said, "Look, this is the idea I've got. Do you think there's something in it?" And these parents were buzzing, and they were like, "We'd love that. We'll want to find out more." And then I sort of sat back a bit, and then they started talking to each other. And I thought, what an absolutely brilliant experience this is, that they're meeting other parents that have got similar experiences, and they're sharing advice. And I thought, I've got to use this. And so we set up these sessions, and I had educational psychologists come in. I had people from CAMS come in. My mum came in. My mum works with parents of parenting crisis, basically. And she came and did some sessions, which was really weird, sitting watching my mum at the front of my classroom. And it was just brilliant. I absolutely loved it. And like I say, it really sort of uncovered that actually a lot of the information that I needed and that I was ringing professionals for and I was writing referrals for was actually sat at the end of the phone, and it was the parents that had it, and I just wasn't using that resource. So it was a really, really big moment for me in sort of understanding how important that was.
And completely new to me, Sam. That sounds, when we talk about involving parents, what a really novel and interesting way of doing that. And something that I can see would also create a kind of a real cohesion between home and school, and kind of keeping those links fresh and keeping parents updated and on side. I can see the many benefits of that actually, and something that I think would benefit teachers, children, parents, and all stakeholders in the school. So that sounds really interesting. Um, but just thinking then of those parents that may be harder to reach in terms of perhaps don't respond to telephone calls, emails, requests for meetings. How do you begin to overcome that, Sam?
I'm pleased you asked because it sounded all rosy there. When I moved to the second school I worked in Newcastle,
Mm.
I was I was quite naive. I remember going for my look around and meeting the head teacher at the time and saying, "Oh, I set up this parent group and it got nominated for an award, and Ofsted loved it, blah blah blah." And he looked at me and he said, "It won't happen here, son." And I thought, "What?" Like, I've just told him the best idea I've ever had in my career, and it's gone really well and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, nah, nonsense. It'll be fine. So when I started at this school, bearing in mind this is the second school I've worked in, I'd trained in the school that I ended up, getting the job in. It was also the school that was half a mile from the house I grew up in. Half of the teaching assistants had babysat me as a child. This I completely knew that community. I knew the people in that community. They knew me. So then when I moved to this new school, I was a completely unknown entity.
Mm.
And so I thought, you know what, regardless of what he says, I'm going to invite them in. And so I did the same thing. I did a survey about when the best time would be. I invited parents in and I sat there and nobody turned up. And I was absolutely devastated. And he was right.
Mm.
And so going back to what you said, some people are harder to reach and some people don't respond. And I thought, you know what, I've got to try something different here. Is it because there's a lot of families that English is, an additional language? Is it because relationships are poor? Is it because they don't know what SEN is? So I tried a different tact. So I set up a newsletter system. I had a newsletter that I made for kids, a newsletter that I made for staff, a newsletter that I made for parents. I wrote it in real sort of basic speak. I didn't want to do any jargon. I didn't want to overload anyone or anything like that. And it was fairly well received. A few people talked about it. It didn't achieve what I wanted it to achieve. I didn't get that community feel from it. I was sending it out and then hoping that somebody picked it up. And I really struggled with that, and it got me really. I was really bothered by it because I'd used this tool and it had worked so well in my first school. I was worried about, I wanted to get that right again. So I tried that. That didn't work. I tried doing one-to-one meetings, and I got some attendance, but it wasn't great. And so the last thing I did was when we were looking at our Facebook and our Twitter and things, I was getting a lot more engagement from parents. They were accessing it in their own time, and digesting information however they wanted from their sofa or whatever it was at their break at work. And so I made some YouTube videos, kept them really
Mm.
short, really basic. Used like I had a transcript that was translatable and added a translate button to the website, so parents who didn't speak English could access it too, and that was much better. I was getting much more response from that and much more feedback, and the plan was to grow that and continue that, and that was when I moved on. So hopefully somebody else has picked that up and maybe is going with it if it continues to work. But yeah, there can be serious pitfalls. Different communities have different sort of ways of taking things in, different responses. And so going back to that head teacher who said it won't work here, so he was right. But I didn't want to be dampened. I wanted to try and find another way. So yeah, persevere, and I guess go to them as opposed to wait for them to come to you.
Mhm. And I think as well, try and perhaps novel approaches such as the use of technology initially, and then moving on to perhaps developing that to more face-to-face things because they've seen you on camera or on their phone, and they might feel a little bit more inclined to come into school. But we forget, we're in schools all the time. For those that haven't been in schools for 5, 10, 15 years plus, I would imagine that can be quite intimidating places, and not everyone had a brilliant experience of their kind of formative school years. So I think that there may be something in that. Okay, so just kind of sticking with parents, Sam. In terms of kind of your new role and kind of everything that you're doing there, what are kind of your first things that you're going to do to get parents on board with you, with the staff team, so that teachers who are listening, leaders who are listening, might be able to implement some of those, just some really quick fire stuff. Oh, are you there, Sam? I can see you there. I think you might have just slipped off a little bit. Okay, let me just round up slightly, kind of what we've covered so far. So we've been talking about relationships. Sam's made some really good points on why he feels that relationships are the starting point of everything that we do, and kind of developing trust. We've talked about Thrive as well. So please do read up on that. One thing that's kind of stuck with me that Sam's mentioned on the podcast today is about when children are telling you about their feelings, this idea of catching it, matching it, and throwing it back to them. And Sam's talked really passionately there about dynamic differentiation, and actually differentiation being for pretty much every child and differentiating your approach. And I think perhaps that might be a fresher way of thinking about differentiation than differentiation by task, which I think actually lots of schools have moved away from. And some really interesting points there around engaging with parents, difficult behaviour, and trying to kind of blend what happens in school, what happens outside of school, to make a far more coherent and cohesive approach to supporting children. So Sam, I was just saying before you slipped out of internet connection or whatever happened there, kind of you're starting a new role, or you have started a new role. What's the first thing that you're going to do to try and support parents kind of getting on board with your vision, and buying into what you're going to be about as a school?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Yeah, sorry, I slipped out there. I asked a good group of friends of mine that I'm in a DM group with on Twitter, that I've been in communication with for a number of years now. I said, what should I be doing? What advice have you got? And the general theme from all of the people in that chat was listen, learn. There's a lot of information there. Sit down with staff, find out what they love, what the things about the school are that they absolutely adore and never want to change. They came up with 113 different reasons why, why that's important to listen, and they gave examples of how they've been let down by staff in the past, and leaders that have come in all gung-ho and made loads of decisions without actually truly understanding what was going on. So the most important thing I took away is Paul Watson had said. He said, sit down with everybody. And then he said, do something that's going to, gain people's respect and trust, whether it's you put something on at Christmas time or something like that. And, I really stand by that. I've been there a couple of weeks now working with a brilliant executive head, and there's a lot of things that we want to change, but equally there's a lot of things in that school that the protected characteristics of the character of the school that you don't want to wipe clean. And a lot of the staff have been there a lot longer than most, so it's important that we tap into that. So listen and learn has been my motto for the last couple of weeks.
Words to live by, Sam, in many respects. Thank you. I mean, we're going to change tack slightly now, because we have talked about SEND and relationships, and we've really drawn out some really meaty topics there. But I just wanted to change, because I know that another thing that you're interested in, Sam, is writing, in particular, writing with a purpose and an audience. So just thinking about that, why is it important for children to learn how to write with purpose and audience in their mind?
Yeah, I'm really, really passionate about writing. I've always loved writing. That's been my thing. It was my way of letting go of feelings when I was younger, whether it was writing stories or poems or whatever it is. Um, that was my go-to. So it sort of followed me into, I did sort of English A level and things like that, and continued a bit of writing when I was at university. So it's always been my passion. But one of the things that I've consistently found, and lots of people that talk about it, is there's always a bit of a battle, isn't it, getting people to write? There's always that age-old, you know, sort of complaint that boys don't want to write long and boys don't want to write stories, all this sort of stuff. So throughout my time teaching, I've always tried to give them a purpose for it, give children a purpose and a point for it, and say it's not just for me to read in your book and then put away and move on to the next topic. There's a reason for it. So whether that's just creating a book of the stories that the kids have at the back of the class and they can go back and have a look through it, whether it's putting it on Twitter or something like Pobble, which I'm a great fan of, given that that writing an audience around the world, whether it's, I've done some things working with the local museum. So in my first school, we did a project around local history. And so the kids produced some brilliant writing, and I managed to get in touch with the museum, who said that they would display it for us. So then the parents could go and see it over half term. And I tell you what, those kids that were reluctant to write at the start of that topic certainly weren't at the end, when they knew that their work was going to go on display next to, you know, a boat that's been there for 150 years. It's really, it brings things to life, doesn't it? So I'm really about making things, pop. It's exciting. There's a real point to it. You know, it's transcending into all subjects, really. I think the best lesson I ever taught was I shouldn't say this to a maths lead, but a maths lesson when I was training in year one, and the children were doing some measuring, and pretended that they'd had a delivery from the Build-A-Bear workshop, whose cutting machine had broken, so it couldn't measure the ribbons for the bear's bows or whatever it was. And I set the class a task of measuring the different colour bows and putting them back in the box. And
Mhm.
the buzz in that classroom was incredible. And then the next day, they wrote a letter back to the Build-A-Bear factory saying thank you, and could they help again? And when you've got that purpose and that excitement, that spark, it doesn't matter whether they're 4, 5, 10 or 11. They really, really want to do it.
Mm.
I remember another one where a teacher colleague of mine um pretended that there'd been a tree falling down, and I'll never forget, she put the lanyard of her teaching assistant underneath the tree. And we had to quickly pull a few children aside who I think we might have scarred, and reassure them that the teaching assistant was just having a cup of tea back in the classroom. But I tell you what, they were fired up to write. They were fired up to explain that when they could relay back to that emotion that they'd felt 10 minutes beforehand. So I'm all about giving writing a purpose and bringing it to life. And
Mm.
sometimes it's easy to do. Sometimes it's a little bit hard, and we have to be a bit more creative. But yeah, definitely writing with an audience and a purpose.
Yeah, I think there's something in that, and you've just triggered a memory from a lesson I observed a while back, actually, an English lesson. The teacher had been reading The Day the Crayons Quit, and the next day when the children came in, she'd got some police tape and tied up all of the chairs that the children were sitting on, and she told them that the chairs had quit and they had to write a persuasive piece to get the chairs back. So all of those little hooks and kind of contextualizing, yeah, I think having a real sense of purpose and audience in mind can be a real motivating factor for children, and can be done in so many creative and different ways. One of my passions, and I'm no kind of I know kind of maths is me real passion, but another passion of mine in primary education is the use of picture books, and I'm a real advocate for using those right in early years, but all the way through to year 6 and beyond, because I think they're so rich and chosen well can be really motivating um, for children. Anyway, that's as a little aside there. Um, what do you think then, Sam, if we're thinking around purpose and audience and really providing that context for children to write and to motivate them to write? What do you think some of the challenges are for teachers in order for them to do that well?
Yeah, another good question. Time,
Mm-hmm.
experience. It's really tough. We're asked to be very, very creative people with, your background might not be English. Your background might, be, some people are primarily history based or primarily music based or modern foreign languages or something like that. You might not necessarily have all of that experience. Um, I think it can be really tough, but I've always found the benefit. You've just given an example there that's a brilliant one that people can take away. The power of social media, the stuff that's out there is fantastic.
Mm.
People sharing that positive practice and great examples. Like I've gone back to, I go back to it again. That group I'm in, sounding out different ideas. Look, I'm doing this unit about this. Have you got any ideas about this? I spoke about him on the Primary Education Voices podcast when I spoke to Matt. But Stephen Connor, who's a good friend of mine, I was really struggling with a writing unit. We're doing adventure stories about conquering the monster, and he's got a brilliant blog where he's pretty much just giving you all of the resources.
Mm.
So as much as I say time's tight and money's tight and creativity might be limited, there's so much out there now, isn't there? Yes, you have to filter it, and yes, you have to look at go right. That's not going to work in my setting, and that's not right for me. But there's so much out there to call upon, and yeah, picture books too are great. And again, Paul Watson, massive advocate of that. And you can pull things out. One of the things I loved teaching in year 6 was the book The Arrival by
Mm-hmm.
Sean Tan, and then look at the world we're in now, and actually you can do some serious comparisons. You've got refugees landing from Ukraine, and they're in a completely different world, and they've got to get used to a completely different culture and a system. And that picture book brings all those conversations to life. You don't have to, you know, get in touch with your local museum to have a display up there to create that authentic purpose. You could actually have that from a discussion that's rich around something that's going on in the classroom. I know when you're doing Writing to Persuade, and we look at all of the stuff that Marcus Rashford did a few years ago during COVID and his campaigns for free school meals, there's a lot of authentic purpose stuff that's on your doorstep as well, and things that you can just pick up instantly from looking
Mm.
online. So definitely, yeah, barriers are time, money, and sort of creative resource, but there's a lot of stuff out there that you can tap into for free and use that power of social network.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, and I mirror that, in terms of the use of some really well published resources or well thought out resources, and kind of adapting them, and like Sam says, sifting through them and making them pop. I think, as you maybe had said earlier, Sam, making things really pop and making it really special for the children. Okay, we're going to finish with a quick word from our sponsor, and then I've got 3 final quick fire questions, just to kind of drill down and to tie all of this podcast together. So this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles to advance your own professional development today, and happy reading. So I've got 3 final questions, Sam, and on the surface of them, they seem fairly straightforward. Actually, once you start and think about them, they're maybe more kind of convoluted and challenging than I anticipated. So the question one is, what's the biggest reward of teaching?
Well, that's a huge question, isn't it? Right, okay. I'm going to try and be really quick with this one. Biggest reward of teaching is when you hear that little nugget in the future that you've really made a difference to somebody. So, whether it's a parent reaches back out to say that they're now at university doing such and such and they remember your whatever lesson. I had an email from a parent just in the summer holidays to say that this girl had felt that she'd been written off by other teachers, had now just graduated, or has just got onto a university course and is going to help children in an orphanage in Africa. And I thought, if she's doing something so inspiring and she remembers me as being part of that journey, that is the exact reason I got into teaching, to make a difference to someone's life.
Thank you, Sam. What are some of the biggest challenges in teaching then?
Biggest challenge for me, I'm going to stick with that SEN hat. SEN is becoming a really challenging situation. The system is absolutely broken, and we're having to firefight, unfortunately. So my biggest challenge as a SENCO is when staff come to me and they're at breaking point, and I know that my answer isn't going to be the answer that they need. So that's a big challenge for me at the minute.
And I think that's probably mirrored by a lot of SENCOs, a lot of leaders in a lot of schools. It's, it is an area that's underfunded, an area that's underappreciated in some ways. And, like you've said tonight, Sam, the kind of the buck lies at the door of the school to do everything that they possibly can. And sometimes, unfortunately, that isn't enough, and children need very specific and very tailored support, and that can take a long time. Okay, final question then. What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about coming into the wonderful world of teaching?
Absolutely do it. Yes, there'll be negatives and people will say negative things, but when you have that good conversation, or you've taught that lesson where you feel like you were absolutely brilliant, or you, I don't know, score that goal when you're playing with the kids playing football at lunchtime, whatever that may be, those moments are so special. They are absolutely brilliant. So get into it, stick by it, give it a chance. Yes, there'll be bumps on that ride, but the highs are so much higher than the lows.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you so much for your time on this podcast tonight. I know lots of listeners will have taken so much from your words, from your experience, and I feel like you've really spoken from the heart tonight, and kind of allowed us to learn about you and kind of your earlier experiences. So thank you for sharing. I really do appreciate it. The only thing left to say is thank you to all of the listeners. We look forward to sharing other stories from other really inspirational people across the world of education. You can listen to other episodes on the Teacher Talk Radio streaming services, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. But thank you ever so much once again, Sam, for joining me tonight on The Late Show, and thank you to all of the listeners for your time as well, and we will see you very soon. Take care, everyone.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.